The purpose of this recording is to go through the 6-mark question that you did in your last test. And this question was, using examples, evaluate the success of sustainable traffic management strategies. So first of all, let's cube this question. So the command word is evaluate. And when we are evaluating, we need to say why it was good and also why it was bad. We're talking about the success. So out of a score of 1 to 10, how good is this? And you need to back this up using examples. Now, the examples that you could have referred to are Freiburg, Singapore, and we're talking about traffic management strategies. Okay, now it's worth 6 marks, so you would only have to refer to one example, but you'd have to say why it was good and why it was bad. Now, I'm going to go through all 3 examples that you looked at in that week of work, but you would only have to talk about one of them. So you might want to just go to the part of the video that relates to the case study that you talked about in your answer. Okay then, so let's look at Freiburg first. So you will see that we would write one P chain looking at why it was successful, one P chain looking at why it wasn't successful, and then you would have to basically have a little summary at the end. So this is like our conclusion about whether we think it was successful or not. So if we were talking about what was successful about this, we would say that it was efficient and cheap, meaning that the whole community or the majority of population could use it. And you could back up this point by the fact that per 1,000 residents, so per 1,000 people, there are less than 500 cars. So that suggests that a lot of people do use this tram system. However, if you were talking about what was unsuccessful about this, you know, it's worth referring to this figure here, figure A, and the fact that if you actually look at motor vehicles in 2020, they were still at 29%, and in 1982 they were only at 39%. So in terms of how it's been unsuccessful, it's only reduced motor vehicles from 39% in 1982 to 29% in 2020, which hasn't really been that much of a drop. And in addition, there's only an extra 9% using public transport. So, you know, there's still not a lot of people using the tram, maybe as many as they would have hoped. So if I was giving this a score out of 10, I'd probably give it a 7, okay? And the reason for that, although we've seen a reduction in cars and obviously CO2 rates, there's not been as many people using the tram system as I would have liked. Let's look at the next example then. So this is looking at Singapore. And it says, as a result of the transport policies, there's 45% less traffic. So I think that's worth writing down. 45% less traffic. And that is because they have increased petrol prices. So by increasing petrol prices and putting in registration fees, there is less traffic. Now this is good because it's reduced the amount of cars, but it's also unsuccessful because they haven't really brought in a strategy. There's not really been a strategy that makes the city more sustainable. They haven't increased the amount of people using public transport. They've just made it expensive. So if you can afford to pay the hefty fines and afford to pay the high petrol prices, you're still going to drive your car. And that is why here it says that car ownership has only declined by 1%. So it's not actually that high if you think about it. It's only declined by 1%. So it's actually less than 1% decline in cars. Okay, so let's see if there's any more positives, because generally it's quite negative. Well, they've brought in a car sharing scheme, but it doesn't say how successful that's been, which suggests that it hasn't been that successful. And it says that they've had a development of the overhead railway and system, but it doesn't say how much. So how big is this? So if you were talking about Singapore and its effectiveness, it's probably not that effective. There's not enough data to back this up. So I would give this a score of less than 5 out of 10. Okay, so then the final one is Beijing. So when we're looking at Beijing, we're looking at, first of all, what have they done to make it successful? So they've managed to get car sales down to 20% of the population own cars. So if only 20% of the population, that's a fifth, what are the extra 4/5 doing? Well, they've brought in an expansive public transport system. So this is similar to Freiburg. And as a result, this means that over half, so over 50% of the population are using this. So that's really successful. As a result, there's been a 12% drop in their car use. And if you compare that to Singapore, Singapore only had a 1% drop. And Freiburg had a 10% drop. So in terms of the amount of cars they've got off the roads, Beijing has been the most successful. So if I was evaluating this, I'd say it was also been very successful. And there's other things here. So not only has there been a drop in car use, but there's also been an increase in the amount of cycling. So this is very, very beneficial. So if I was giving this a score, I'd probably give it an 8 or a 9 out of 10. And it's because if you're comparing it against Singapore and Freiburg, it has been more successful than other strategies. So just to recap, you wouldn't have to refer to all of these examples for a 6-mark question. You might want to compare 1 or 2 of them, or if you have a lot of information on it. So for example, if you chose to speak about Freiburg, you could just speak about Freiburg and give 1 P chain saying why it's been good, 1 P chain saying why it's been bad, and then a summary overall. If you have any more questions about this, then please send me a message on It's Learning, but hopefully this video has helped clear up what you needed to do to get at least 5 or 6 marks out of 6 in this practice question.